exposed to a wide variety of different things.
The new building is woven into the curriculum and into the student experience.
As an entrepreneurship professor, our entrepreneurship center is right in the building. I can host my classes there.
With a 5,000 square foot incubator, real businesses are working out of that incubator.
The center is all about innovation, and innovation is a key competency for future business leaders.
And then, of course, our behavioral lab. We're very excited about that. The technology in the lab is cutting edge and state-of-the-art. It's a testament to our educational philosophy at Zarb and how to best create leaders of the future.
Good evening. I am Janet Lenahan, and I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as Dean of the Frank G. Zarb School of Business at Hofstra University. Before I begin the formal introductions, I would like to thank President Rabinowitz and members of the Board of Trustees, who without their support, we would not be the highly ranked business school we are today. I also have the pleasure of welcoming you to our event this evening, an engaging discussion on the business of healthcare and the importance of transformational leadership. Tonight's topic is especially relevant since at Zarb we are educating and developing the business leaders of tomorrow. Events like this underscore the Zarb experience, having industry leaders share their insights to help us understand the complex challenges facing organizations today. At Zarb, students have the opportunity to apply what they learn in the classroom through our many hands-on experiences, such as the state-of-the-art Behavioral Business and Research Lab, which has cutting-edge technology, including eye tracking, facial analysis, and voice analysis, to our 34 Bloomberg terminals in the Martin B. Greenberg Trading Room, and this fall, we are opening a new center for cybersecurity, equipped with over $1 million in technology, a joint venture with the Zarb School and the Fred Domanis School of Engineering. Zarb students are also given the opportunity to learn from thought leaders of industry, like our Chief Executive Officer with us this evening. Each of these experiences differentiate a Zarb education and helps to distinguish our graduates. We have another outstanding leader here tonight. In nearly 5 decades at Hofstra, his vision and guidance has fostered the incredible growth of our university. I think all of us would echo the importance of mentors in our career, and I'm very fortunate to have benefited from his guidance throughout my career at Hofstra. As many in the room know, he has answered the call each and every time Hofstra has needed him, and recently returned to reprise his role as provost, leaving me to follow him as dean of the Zarb School. An excellent mentor and role model to me and to the Hofstra community of what it takes to be a great leader. Please join me in welcoming our provost and senior vice president for academic affairs, Dr. Herman Berliner.
Five decades? Whoa. Just to set the record straight, I started in childcare. I would like to put it in a context. The reality is I go back more than half the buildings and half the trees on campus. The good news is I'm still moving. So I'm so pleased to be here for the Zarb Dean's Distinguished Lecture Series. It is important for all of us, students, faculty, business scholars, and alumni, to come together annually and hear from one of the nation's top leaders in different areas related to business. When we began the series 4 years ago, we began with a day dedicated to the future of business education. The following 2 years, we considered leadership itself, how it's represented in business and the American economy, in banking and finance. And our speakers were A.J. Banga, President and CEO of MasterCard, Jane Stevenson, Global Leader for CEO Succession of Korn Ferry, and last year, Roger Ferguson, CEO of TIAA-CREF. This year, our distinguished speaker is Michael Dowling, one of the century's top leaders in healthcare. You'll hear more about Michael Dowling from our dean in just a few minutes. Since Hofstra University, led by President Rabinowitz, began partnering with the Northwell system just over 10 years ago, we started 2 colleges, the Zarb School of Medicine at Hofstra Northwell and the Hofstra Northwell School of Graduate Nursing and Physician Assistant Studies that are already highly regarded in the medical and healthcare fields. And that is due in no small part to the leadership of Michael Dowling, a person who is unafraid to advocate for the needs of the healthcare industry, shaped great organizations since the beginning of the Republic, if not the beginning of time. Quote, "If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader," said John Quincy Adams. That remains true today. And that's what the best business schools do. While teaching the fundamentals of business, whether that's management or finance, analytics or tax, they also manage to model great leaders. They have alumni networks and advisory boards and faculty who embody the quality of leaders, those who inspire and innovate, and those who build and invest and provide opportunities to students for mentorship, for practicums, for experiential learning, and for research. That is how leaders are created, by watching and working with great ones. It's why we bring all of you together today, those who embody leadership and those who will be tomorrow's leaders. If leaders are made here at Zarb, it is a reflection of the audience today. We are so pleased to have Dean Lenahan leading the Zarb School into a new era of business education, one that is flexible and often online, one that recognizes the realities of a global economy. She is an absolutely terrific dean. It is critical that we continue to evolve, and I have no doubt with the faculty, our students, alumni, and friends, we will continue to change and recognize the needs of an evolving 21st century economy. Thank you all for joining us today.
It is now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this evening, Mr. Michael Dowling. If you would, please hold your questions until after he concludes his remarks, as we will have plenty of time for questions and answers. As you read Mr. Dowling's bio in our program, I'm sure you cannot help but marvel at his many accomplishments and achievements. From humble beginnings in Ireland to transformational roles in government, and to ultimately CEO of Northwell Health, one of the largest health systems in the United States, with over 30% market share and over $11 billion in annual revenue. Mr. Dowling is truly a visionary and inspirational leader who, at his core, believes in the empowerment of employees. From embracing leadership techniques like management by walking around, to attending weekly onboarding sessions with new hires, he believes a leader's job is to listen to frontline employees and remove the roadblocks that inhibit them from achieving the great next innovation. As a lifelong student of organizational behavior, I marvel at his ability to create a culture of innovation and growth across nearly 70,000 employees, all the while maintaining a close-knit community based on the importance of everyday communications forged by strong relationships and a commitment to a shared purpose. As he once noted, his goal is not to light a fire under his employees, but rather the one within them, to be passionate about their work, to help them understand their role in the overall success of the organization in achieving its mission and in serving the greater good of society. He transformed the organization from a collection of jobs to an impassioned network of innovators. A leader among leaders, his recent call to action of other healthcare CEOs to unite to confront the healthcare crisis of gun violence speaks to his vision for a brighter future for all. As he said in a recent interview, and I quote, "The United States is the beacon of hope for the rest of the world, and we all have contributions to make. If we put our talents together and we work together, we can make this place better than it is today." In addition to being dean, I have the great privilege of being a professor of management. In that role, I've had many Northwell employees in my classes over the years. And regardless of the level at which they find themselves within the organization, when asked to name the leader they admire most, it's no wonder that I've yet to come across one that didn't say their CEO. He clearly not only exemplifies best practices in leadership, he sets the benchmark at which all leaders should strive to achieve. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker this evening, Mr. Michael Dowling.
Thank you very, very much. Thanks for those very, very kind words. And it's great to be here, and I'm delighted that, to have been asked, and obviously to be asked by Hofstra University, which, as was just mentioned, where we do a lot of interesting work together, and I will reference that as we go through here. Let me just say something because to all of the audience at the very beginning, especially since most of you are about to launch your careers, and that is that there are no limits. Don't ever let your current circumstance limit what you think you can possibly do in the future. I will reference those points a little bit as I go through. But as was mentioned, I've had a pretty interesting career. And it's also important to remember, as many in the room here are, or were, or our parents were, I'm also an immigrant. Something that's very, very important for all of us to keep in mind these days, that we're all immigrants or descendants of immigrants. And quite frankly, I probably would never have been able to accomplish or have the positions that I've had if I had not come to the United States at a young age. Because this is a great place that provides the opportunity for people to grow and develop and excel, pursue any opportunity that they want to pursue. And I think that we should, in the day like today, in these days when there's an awful lot of negativity and a lot of half-truths being spouted about or spoken about, that we remember the importance of immigration and the importance of who we are as a country and what our history is. So as was mentioned, I've been in the academic world. I've been in government. I have been in the insurance business, the health insurance business, and I have been now for the last almost 25 years in the provider side of the business. So I've been very, very fortunate. So I have seen the business from healthcare business from all different angles. I didn't start out doing that. As I mentioned to some of the students at the beginning, my first job, I grew up milking cows in a small farm area. I ended up as a 16-year-old working in steel factories south of London, in part to support my family and to figure out how to get my way through school. I ended up then working in the docks in the west side of Manhattan, not too far from here, a couple of blocks on the west side on the Hudson River, on the docks, and did that for quite a number of years. And then ended up in construction in the city. And then ended up as a plumber, working for a company up in New Rochelle, putting in bathrooms and sinks. Went to Fordham University. Was very, very fortunate to meet people that encouraged me and gave me opportunities, including many people during my career that gave me opportunities even when I didn't even have a clue that I was able to do the job that they were giving me the opportunity for. Which is the other lesson, is that when somebody opens up a door for you, you walk through it. You take advantage of it. You don't sit around and saying, I don't think I can do this. I think this is too difficult. You grab it and you go for it. You give it your best shot. And when you give it your best shot, you find out that you're going to do it better than most other people that you thought might have done it better than you. And then I ended up after, when I was at Fordham University on faculty, I ended up being in government for 12 years with Governor Cuomo, and then ended up in the insurance business, as I said. And then was very fortunate to come to North Shore. At the very beginning, and I'll reference that in a minute. So what I was thinking of doing is taking a look at healthcare from the balcony view, like standing above the issue. Healthcare can get very, very complicated. All topics and all subjects can get very, very complicated. If you get into the detail, in the base levels, it can get so complicated you get confused. If you stand back from it, it's like watching a hockey game or any sports game. If you're down near the field, and I played a lot of competitive sports, so I've been in that situation. If you're down near the field, you see certain plays going on, but it's very confusing. If you stand up high up and you're in a balcony looking down at the play, you can see the plays developing. You can see what's happening. You can see the play going on over here, but then you can know what people are thinking about or possibly moving on that side of the field. So if you take any subject matter and you stand back from it, not get confused by the excessive detail, you're able to understand it a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is basically stand back from healthcare a little bit and give you a sense of what I see some of the major issues in healthcare. I'm going to pick 10 of them. And I'm watching the clock, but I'm going to pick 10. The trouble with healthcare is that you could talk about this forever, right? And I have a tendency to want to do that, okay? So I'll try to curtail my desire to keep talking about this kind of stuff. But I will say one thing before I start going into the 10 issues. One is that I am very, very fortunate and have been very, very fortunate to be able to work in the field of healthcare, because I don't think that there is any better place to work where you spend each and every day and every moment thinking about that which you can do to make life better for somebody else. And that's what we do every day. People come into our facilities not doing well, not feeling well, worried, concerned. By the end of the day, many of them leave feeling better, cured, etc. Or if they don't leave that day, they leave days later. Some of them maybe a week later. But to be in a position of actually doing something each and every day, whatever the action you take is actually going to improve the lives of somebody else, is something unbelievable, important consideration when you're thinking about what you want to do with your career. So my first lesson is do that which you love doing. Because if you love doing what you're doing, it is never work. You've heard that phrase many, many times, but it isn't. You get up in the morning, you can't wait to go to the place where you actually have your occupation, because to them it's a mission, it's a focus, it's not work. So I've been very, very, very fortunate. So let me talk about 10 items in healthcare, and I'll reference some leadership lessons along the way. I then will talk, at the end, I'll also come back to some issues on leadership. I'll try to intersperse them together. So let's go with the first big item in healthcare, which is pretty obvious to everybody, is that there is continuing consolidation in healthcare. No different, by the way, which people often forget, no different than what's happening in almost every industry sector, constant consolidation. In New York right now, there are 5 big health systems. We are the largest, by far. If you look across the country, there are 30 to 40 very, very large health systems, and many of those health systems are getting larger. We, Northwell, was the first health system to be created in New York. We began the merger issue in New York back in the early 90s. So the lesson there is to try to get out front and be the first in what you do. Just go do it. Observe what's happening elsewhere. Then decide that you want to go and do something here that isn't existing at the moment, but you know it does exist in other areas, and figure out, does it make a sense for you to do it locally, which we looked back in the 1990s and said, early 1990s, and said, we should be doing locally what has been happening around the country, because you could see the trends developing. You didn't have to wait, you could see it coming, It's like there's a storm cloud coming. You could actually see it. The train is coming. You're sitting on the tracks. You better get out of the way or you become toast. So continuing consolidation. And I would argue, maybe there'll be a question on this, that the consolidation in healthcare, as in other industries, but in healthcare especially, and in our situation especially, was necessary and important and was a success. It was a good thing to do because I could make a big argument if we hadn't consolidated in this market, there would be parts of Long Island and the region that would be bereft of healthcare today if we had not taken many of the hospitals that were in terrible condition then and merged them with us. So there's a positive aspect to consolidation. And I know some of the rhetoric out there suggests that it is all negative. It is not all negative. I would argue that it's mostly positive. The second point I'd make is that healthcare and all healthcare systems are unbelievably complicated, very multifaceted and multidimensional. So let me just explain this for a second. We are a provider of healthcare, so we're a big provider. I'm not just talking about Northwell, but also a lot of others that are similar. We're a big provider of healthcare. We provide all aspects of healthcare at all levels, from A to Z. We are an educator. We are one of the largest academic teaching places in the United States. So we're a big university-type place that does massive education. We're also a huge in research. We're also an employer. As was mentioned, the biggest employer in New York State, the biggest private employer. So we suffer from all of the issues that lots of other employers suffer from because we're also an employer as well. All the costs of healthcare that affects all other employers affects us as an employer, even though we're also a provider. Third point, which is important, and I referenced it at the beginning, but important to state it again, is that we have a unique mission and a unique function. One is that the business and healthcare, we're in life and death situations all the time. It's not a business like when I worked in plumbing, or I worked in the docks, or I worked in construction. This is different. You're dealing with life, you're dealing with people's well-being, you're dealing with health, you're dealing with people in distress each and every day. If you get a phone call in the middle of the night and there's a real disaster, this can be a life and death situation, a serious life and death situation. So the mission part of healthcare is extraordinarily important. And if you spend any time in any one of our facilities and observe what goes on each and every day, it's pretty humbling. And it adds perspective to life. So whenever you think you're having a bad day or a bad moment, as we all do, or a bad week, and you think your own circumstance is not great, come to a healthcare facility and walk through the ICU. Come to a healthcare facility and walk through the cancer ward of a children's hospital or the cancer ward of an adult hospital. Walk through the emergency department, and you will realize pretty quickly that you're very, very fortunate, that the concerns that you have about your own circumstance are pretty minimal relative to what goes on each and every day. Sometimes this is often forgotten about, especially often forgotten about in political debates and when politicians stand up and talk about it. They often forget that that's what it is at its essence. And it's also very, very important and humbling to understand that at some point all of us will be in that situation. That at some point, and maybe we have a lot of young people in the room and it may not seem that that's ever possible, but at some point everybody will be on the other side of the equation when it comes to healthcare. So it's important to understand the business of healthcare and what that means. It's different than a lot of other businesses, and I would argue even more complex. The other thing to keep in mind is that we are in a business that takes care of everybody irrespective of circumstance. We are required by law, if you're running hospitals, to take care of all patients irrespective of whether they can pay for it or not. We do not turn people away. A lot of business students here, just think of many other businesses that basically say, I will provide you with a service as long as you can pay for it. We're in the business of providing services whether you can pay for it or not. That's a different circumstance. Fourth point, it's a very competitive business. Healthcare today is unbelievably competitive, and competition I like. I like competition. I think you're only real good if you have good competition. Because if you don't have competition, you get lazy. You get complacent. There's nothing to push you. There's nothing to drive you. It's like being an athlete. You become a very good athlete when you have the best competition that you're going up against next week, next month, next year, etc. You have to get fit, and you have to get ready, and you have to move quickly. And you can't sit around just thinking about something forever. You got to act. But competition today in the healthcare is, they have two kinds. You have traditional competition. So in the New York area, so we compete against Mount Sinai, Columbia Pres, Montefiore, to an extent up in the Bronx, NYU. I would call them traditional competitors. We know what they do, they know what we do. We observe them all the time. We know exactly what they're thinking about doing. They know what we're doing. But now you have all the types of competition today. Many of you in this field would be very familiar with these, especially young people. Amazon is a competitor. Google is becoming a competitor. CVS is a competitor. Walgreens becoming a competitor. Every venture capital group out there wants to be involved in healthcare. And keep this in mind, while everybody out there complains about healthcare, everybody wants to be in it. This is an awful business, it costs too much money. Well, every Wall Street analyst, every Wall Street company wants to have a piece of healthcare somehow. There's a bit of an irony there someplace. The very same people who will go around telling you that the healthcare costs are way too high are the very same people who are in our offices the following day wanting us to buy their services. Whether or not they're the services that we need or not is another issue. But they push to sell the goods and services that they want to sell, because for them it's income. When they're out publicly talking about it, it's a cost issue. And therefore we've got to bring costs down, then reduce the types of goods and services that you present to us that you want us to buy. And if we don't buy it, therefore we are left sitting around from the customer point of view, where the customer says, why didn't you have that great thing that was advertised on television last week? Change in care delivery. Healthcare has changed dramatically. We started out at the beginning as a hospital system. Today, we're not just a hospital system at all. Not that long ago, about 80% of all of our revenue was hospital revenue. And when we started out, we were just merging hospitals. Today, only about 50% of our business is hospital revenue. The rest of it is non-hospital. It's outpatient, ambulatory, post-acute. So we've almost got 50% ambulatory, 50% inpatient. That trend is occurring across the United States. So when people argue that healthcare hasn't evolved and hasn't changed, nothing could be further from the truth. It's a very different business today. We have, by the way, 23 hospitals, but we have 755 ambulatory outpatient facilities, 755. We were a leader in this. We began this process years ago. We got out front, and we actually pursued the building of ambulatory facilities, even at a time when it cost us money to do so, and we lost money by doing it, but you got to get out there because you knew this is where the world was moving. So we have urgent care centers, imaging centers, cancer centers, because a lot of business, not most, about 40% of businesses business that was once done in a hospital now can be done outside the hospital because of technological advances and medical advances. So that world of healthcare has completely changed, and it will continue to move. Now the whole new world of digital health, telemedicine, all the facilitation made possible by technology is making the delivery of healthcare continue to evolve. And as a leader, you got to be out front in doing these things. And one of the other lessons here is that sometimes you've got to do things when the reimbursement for doing it is not there. You've got to get out ahead of the reimbursement. If you wait around until the reimbursement process, or the people who pay you to do something very innovative, you might have missed the ball. Because sometimes good policy is ahead of the financing. So you've got to get out ahead and not just wait for the financing and to happen first, otherwise you will not be in the lead. A couple of other items. The relationship between the provider and the insurance companies. What people don't often understand, depending on which market you're in, and I don't think politicians understand this much, some providers are insurers, and some insurers are providers. It's a hybrid world. Most of the big providers across the country, like Kaiser Permanente or Intermountain, many of you may have heard of those big systems, are also insurance companies. There are providers like us that are not insurance companies. We had an insurance company, and we had to get out of the business because of some government regulations that made no sense. But where you have a provider that is not an insurance company and has to work with insurance companies, you have this constant competition between insurance companies and providers. On an ongoing daily basis, these are conflicts that continually work. We collaborate on some things, we compete on other things. Sometimes we get paid for services we deliver, sometimes we don't get paid. About 27% of what we do each and every day, we don't get paid for right away. The insurance companies hold back payment. They have a different business model. Now, some of it might be legitimate, but not 27% of it is not legitimate. So we argue back and forth. And increasingly over time, I believe that there will have to be a better relationship between insurance companies and providers, and I'll come back to that point a little bit later. But that's an interesting dynamic in healthcare between providers and insurers. And it takes a lot more discussion than what I'm providing here, but it is a complicated part of the business of delivering healthcare these days. And then you get to the role of government. Government's role has continued to expand, as you would expect. Regulation has continued to expand, especially a lot of unnecessary micro-regulation that sometimes can be ridiculous in its craziness. And government's also role is expanded in terms of payment. So let me explain this part a little bit because it gets very confusing. And if you listen to the politicians in the debates talking about this issue, and if you don't understand the inner workings, it becomes, you look at I look at some of these debates and I look at it and say, this is pretty pathetic what they're talking about because they don't understand the business. First point I make though is, as a leader, you've got to constantly be innovative and constantly disrupt, constantly be entrepreneurial. You've got to be constantly trying to break some rules or pushing the envelope. You've got to be thinking out of the box on an ongoing basis. You've got to be asking yourself each and every day, what can I logically disrupt today to make things better? But when you have a highly regulated system and where you have an abundance of compliance rules, it's the antithesis of innovation. So one of the big challenges of a lot of organizations, and I'm not against regulation. Remember, I was a regulator one time. But sometimes it's like everything else, everything has a balance. You can go too far one way or too far another way. But it is very hard to be innovative and entrepreneurial in a culture of compliance and regulation. Because the very concept of compliance and regulation is please don't break a rule. But if you want to innovate, you've got to break a rule. You've got to ask for permission, ask for forgiveness instead of asking for permission sometimes. You've got to get out front. So you either have a rule-based system or you have a principle-based system. And a lot of the rules that are there, a lot of the regulations that are put in place today by government, which has increasingly got much more intensive over the last decade or so, is that it's based on the assumption that everybody that's out there working very, very hard each and every day, are not trusted or cannot be trusted to do something the right way. That we have to watch you all the time because our basic assumption is that you're actually going to do something incorrect or do something wrong. So trying to be innovative in that context can be very, 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 very difficult. The second thing about government payment is that, well, let me explain this a little bit. For a typical big provider of healthcare, we get today, in our case, for example, about 64% of all of the revenue that we get comes from government. And it comes from government from two sources. Medicaid, and that part of the revenue source is going to continue to expand because Medicaid will continue to expand irrespective of what happens reform-wise in Washington or in the states. And then you got Medicare, which continues to expand because about 12,000 people turn age 65 every day. So Medicare is going to continue to expand. So the more of your revenue that's government revenue, the more difficult it is to financially break even. So if you're all government and all of your revenue comes from government, you are broke. You have no money for expansion, no money for upkeep, no money for development of new programs, no money for infrastructure improvement. There is a lesson here as all of the candidates at the moment for elective office are talking about single payer. I am not a fan of single payer because we do have single payer. Nassau University Medical Center in Long Island is a single payer facility where all of its revenue is from government, and you know the situation that place is in, and we're trying to help. Brookdale Hospital, Kingsbrook Hospital, Interfaith Hospital, Wyckoff Hospital, all of those places in Brooklyn that we're trying to help are pretty much all totally reliant upon government reimbursement. You cannot make it. So I'm not against government enhancing their role, but the people who often advocate this kind of a situation do not understand that if you're not financially solvent, then you cannot do the innovative stuff that people want you to do or desire you to do, or the other things that you yourself would want to do. And that's an issue that we may get into in Q&As if you want. And I'm also very familiar with those systems in overseas in other countries because I've actually worked with them in other countries, and I'm doing so at the moment. And this is not to suggest government should not have a bigger role or a different role or a better role, but sometimes the single-payer methodology fails to understand the economic aspect of what happens when you do this. I'll mention 2 or 3 other items in this area in terms of trends. One is going upstream. Remember that the bulk of people's ill health is not due to the lack of medical care. It's due to lifestyle, behavior, and social circumstance. About 75% of our ill health is due to where we live and what we do to ourselves. So it won't be solved only through the provision only of doctors and nurses and hospitals and ambulatory sites. That's an important point to keep in mind. So what everybody is trying to focus on these days is how do you go upstream and talk about doing an awful lot more in prevention, in education, in nutrition, in exercise, in diet. Stop smoking, taking alcohol in extremes. The point I want to make here is that healthcare, the providers, the narrow definition of healthcare in the way most people talk about it is they define it as hospitals and doctors. Yet we are often held responsible for an awful lot of things that we have no responsibility over. We have a role to play. But when they look at mortality stats in terms of the situation in the United States vis-a-vis health, they include mortality resulting from gun violence. We don't go out killing people with guns as a hospital. But the statistics would obviously demonstrate that because we have very high statistics, we, the providers, are the ones that are responsible for it. Not the case. You could prolong this argument. I could discuss this forever. What happens when you walk into a store and you walk in the front of any major shopping center and you go into a store that sells food and you look at all of the bad stuff at the beginning and the aisles at the beginning that you should never buy? What's the responsibility of the food companies and the companies that sell all of that stuff to kids that only make them definitely not necessarily healthy? But every organization I know in the provider side of the business these days, and others, are figuring out how do you go upstream? How do we promote individual health? Because remember, this gets back to the issue of what is health? Health is more than the delivery of medical care. Medical care is a component of health. It's not the totality. It's not equal to. Health is larger. Medical care is a subset. So if you really want to improve health, you would do an awful lot more, and you'd have to do an awful lot more than just the narrow definition that we've often labeled it as healthcare is equivalent to medical care delivery and providers. Not so. And last point, two last points. One is, which obviously everybody here is well aware, and that's the whole digital world and consumerism. Consumerism is changing the nature of healthcare, as is the combination with technology, which forces organizations, obviously, to be extraordinarily consumer-oriented. When I talk to my employees at the organization, I talk about customers, that we're in the customer service business. And one of the things that we have to be doing is providing access to care, maximizing the use of technology and digital health in the future. You will be going to the doctor using your phone. We do that today. In the future, you will go to the first visit to your doctor through the phone, not to a physical facility like an office. Subsequent visits may be going to an office, not the initial visits. We'll be monitoring you from a distance, as we can do today, but imagine what we'll be able to do 10 years from now. The whole digital world, we're in the midst of trying to figure out how do we get ahead of, how do we plan for it, artificial intelligence, machine learning, 5G, whatever you want to call it, all of those technologies are the things that we are working on today in a major way. So for those of you here who are interested in being in the technology world, healthcare is a wonderful open field for people that have the vision to figure out how to create improved access, improved customer service using technology, as long as we don't do the following. As long as we don't forget that there is a human aspect to healthcare delivery. That if you do technology alone and you avoid, you don't understand that it's all about person-to-person contact as well, you're making a big mistake. It's the combination of the technology plus the human aspect that makes the big difference. And the last point I'll make on this is that there's many issues in healthcare, and I'm not going to spend time discussing them here. We've got issues, you hear them being discussed all the time. There's an avalanche of negativity. Everything is bad. The health system is in real bad shape. Everything is terrible. You hear it on television all the time. There are two views of healthcare. There's a pessimistic view of healthcare and there's an optimistic view. The pessimistic view basically is, as you hear mostly during debates and everything else these days, the pessimistic view is that not much is happening that's right. Things are broken. Things are not coordinated. Things cost too much. And there's an aspect of truth to all of these. But there's another way to look at healthcare, and it's the way I look at it, and it's the way I look at leadership, because to me leadership has to be optimistic. You have to be thinking positively about things all the time, because if you're running a large organization and you have lots of employees, if you don't have an optimistic view of the world, then you can't inspire using optimism, or you don't look at the world through an optimistic lens, you're not going to inspire people to follow. So the optimistic view basically is that lots of great things have happened. Lots of great things are happening. There are successes each and every day. But let me ask you this question, and for a lot of young people in the room, you may not fully appreciate it, but I know your parents do. Just think of what has happened over the last 30 to 40 years in healthcare. Just think of the progress over the last 30 years. Remember, you've got to take a long view of some of these things. If you take a snapshot of something in a very short time frame, it looks one way. If you look at it over a longer period of time, it looks very different. You know, it's like David Thoreau, I think he said that if, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. So if you take a span of time, and you go back to the 1960s and 1970s, and you want to look at healthcare from that perspective, imagine what has happened. It's an extraordinarily successful story. Just think of what we can do today that we couldn't even conceive of doing back 30, 40 years ago. In heart disease, in stroke, in cancer, in orthopedics, in neuro, in child health. If you got a heart attack in the 1970s, you had a 30 to 40% chance of dying. Today it's less than 6%. I use myself as an example. I have 3 stents. When I went to the hospital at North Shore, I had 23 options, but I went to North Shore. I found out I had a 96% blockage in my main artery. If that had happened to me in the 1970s, I wouldn't be standing in front of you today. Stents that we take for granted today did not come into the marketplace till 1981. Just think of what you can do today in orthopedics that you could never do before. Hip replacements, knee replacements, shoulder replacements, now being done in an ambulatory outpatient facility, not in the hospital as much as it was before. Think of what you could do today in neurosurgery. Think of the lifespan of cancer patients today vis-a-vis before. The survivorship issue in cancer is one of the biggest problems we're facing in healthcare. People who live a long time with cancer. So the management of cancer patients over a 20, 30-year period of time because of the progress that has been made over the last 30 years. It's pretty extraordinary. So when I look at healthcare and I take that broad view, I look at healthcare as being absolutely extraordinary in its success. You would never know this by listening to an awful lot of people who publicly talk about it in the television every weekend or every week, or some of the pundits or the talking heads, or some of the reporters. You would think that everything is just so bad. It is not. We have issues, yes. We have access issues. We have cost issues. We have transparency issues. We have fragmentation issues. I understand. We're working on all of those. But take a look at the broader picture, the broader perspective. It's been an amazing story. If you were born around the year 1910, your life expectancy on average was about 47 years. Today, young people in the room, you will live 35 to 40 years longer than people expected to live that were born around 1900. Because of the success in healthcare, and because we're living longer, it actually adds to the cost of healthcare delivery, because the older you are and the longer you live, the more expensive you become. So when you hear debates going on television about what Amazon is doing or what JP Morgan is doing with Berkshire Hathaway on healthcare, they're not dealing with the aging problem. And when the politicians talk about healthcare as being the cost of healthcare and they focus on the 35, 40-year-olds, the real cost issues among the elderly. The last 70 to 80% of healthcare costs result from people at the ages of 70, 80, 90. As a result of success, the crisis of success has allowed people to live longer, cost more in the end. Now we can probably do it cheaper and do it better, and I'm not arguing that point. We also have new diseases showing up, because the longer you live, the more you are likely to get Alzheimer's, which is a new disease that we have no cure for today. That's a function of success of keeping people alive a long time. This is another way to look at healthcare. So we've had enormous success, and that progress is continuing. It's continuing in a whole series of arenas. It's continuing in what we're doing on the ambulatory side of the world, as I mentioned earlier. It's continuing in what we're doing with education. Look at the new medical school that we have together with Hofstra, the Zarb School of Medicine, where we have decided, it's a leadership issue, to change the way we educate people. So the medical school has got national, international attention, because we sat back and we said, and I remember these meetings vividly, where we sat down and we said, we do not want to do a medical school that replicates what exists and what existed before. We want to do something different. So we tried a whole new curriculum. People told us we would never get students. People told us that the students, if we got them, they would never succeed. And if they made it through the coursework, they'd never pass the boards. Every one of them completely wrong. So sometimes when people tell you everything is wrong, you know you're right. And since these are business students, let me just mention something that I like to talk about. Be very wary of business plans. They are one group of people's analysis of numbers. And they're typically conservatively oriented to begin with. So some good ideas get killed because some people have a business plan telling you it will never happen, or they can't succeed. In our health system, I'll make the argument that a lot of what we have succeeded in doing over the years that have become phenomenal success were all at the beginning analyzed in business plans as potentially never having an opportunity to succeed. So you have to be very balanced in your view of how you look at these things. You've got to take a look into the future, not build everything on what just happened over the last 5 years. You use that as information, but then you project a new idea into the future and you take risk. You say, I'm going for it, irrespective. The medical school was that. The nursing school was that. Our facility in Greenwich Village, which is a phenomenal facility today, was similarly like that. So these trends are continuing. So let me make a few last comments on leadership. One is, as leaders, and if I look out at the audience here, imagine what the potential people have to make a change in the world over the next 30 to 40 years. So if you're graduating today with an MBA, you should ask yourself the question, what difference am I going to make? What am I going to do that's distinctive? What am I going to do that's going to disrupt? Because it's always better to disrupt yourself before somebody else disrupts you. If you're in an organization, you better disrupt yourself first, because otherwise somebody will come and disrupt you. Just think of the taxi industry in Manhattan, in New York, before Uber. Uber came in, everybody said, oh, don't worry about them. Look at it today. If you own a medallion, look at the situation that many of them are in today. So you disrupt yourself before others disrupt you. But the main ingredient of leadership, in my view, is having an optimistic attitude, having a positive view, having a can-do view, basically saying, this will happen. We can make it work. Nothing is ever perfect to begin with. You start and you improve it over time. As a leader, you've got to promote a culture of continuous innovation and entrepreneurship. If you're running an organization, you've got to allow your people to do innovative things. You've got to accept failure. If you knock somebody down because they fail, you will never succeed. Churchill once said, a great statement, which I like, he said that success is going from failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm. Because success is built on the back of failure. And you've got to take risk. You've got to build capabilities in your organization. Because the future, and this is in our organization these days, the thing that we are most focused on, that I am most focused on, is how you build succession for the world of 20 years from now. What kind of people do we need? What skills should they have? Who should succeed everybody that's currently in a leadership position? The workforce is changing. The nature of work is changing. People work from home more and more. Technology is a mainstay of everybody's work life these days. People want more work-life balance, which I've always had a problem with. I really never know what it was, but I know it's there. People talk about it all the time. I must be there. But you ask yourself, if you have 10 employees, 100 employees, 10,000 employees, the skills that they have today, are they relevant for the future? And imagine what the future is going to be like and what skills will you need. And the pace of change is happening at such a fast pace all the time now, that if you're constantly not rejuvenating yourself on an ongoing basis, you're going to be left sitting on the train tracks when the train is gone. You've got to inspire as a leader. You've got to get people to want to do things, not just because you tell them to do it, but because they believe in on the message that you're sending. And leaders have followers. And I would say one of the things I tell employees, as was mentioned in the introduction, I meet all new employees that are hired in the organization every Monday morning. I have been doing it every Monday morning for 18 years. We hire between 175 and 200 people a week. So I meet all new employees. Reason is, first of all, you want to know the types of people you're hiring. Secondly, you want to make sure that they understand the mission and the focus of the organization. It's important for them to know who the leadership of the organization is. But when you're sitting in the room, you're always thinking, and I'm sitting there each Monday morning, I'm thinking of, are we making sure that we're hiring the right people for a decade from now? People that can work together, despite all the technology. People that can work together. People that are passionate about what they do. People that believe in teamwork. People that are ambitious. People that have grit, perseverance. They don't get scared when things don't go right. They don't get frustrated when things don't go right. Because getting knocked down is not the problem, it's the ability to get back up is the issue. And I would say one last thing I don't want to get overly political. What the hell? If you observe some of our current national leadership, or the people in positions of power, and you want to be a good leader, do the very opposite to what they're doing. Just look at it and say, when you listen to one of those things, sit back and say, that I am not doing. Now you know you're on the right track. And I know it was mentioned earlier that great phrase by John Quincy Adams, who basically said, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you're a leader. So let me stop at this point. I probably talked longer than I should have. But I thought hopefully I gave you a little bit of information about healthcare, and would be delighted to take any questions. I don't know how you're going to organize it. If there are questions, I'd be delighted to take them. If not, maybe we solved all problems. Globally? Well, there's two ways to look at that. One is the things that you do to what effect, what influences what you do have elsewhere that other people follow what you're doing. That's one way you influence globally or nationally. I know, for example, in a lot of the things that we've done, even the medical school, there are people all over the world trying to figure out how to put together a curriculum similar to what we did between Hofstra and Northwell. That has a global impact. So in that sense, you're global. We've had people visiting from Europe and England and Australia, et cetera, et cetera. So your influence can be global. If I look at it the other way, do I plan to run facilities overseas? I don't think so. Do I plan to, and we're doing it today, become an advisor to people overseas, do consulting overseas, become a partner with people overseas? The answer is yes. We're having that discussion today with a whole bunch of players all over. We've done it in England. I'm currently chairing a group in Ireland. We had people from Saudi Arabia yesterday. We have Eastern Europe, France, etc. But having a hospital, running hospitals or ambulatory sites where we actually run them, I don't think so. Because it's also good to have local people do this in those communities that are culturally sensitive. But how they do it, they can be influenced by what we do here. You don't have to be there physically. It's through influence. Now, let me just expand on that a little bit. Do we expect to be, we're growing, by the way, in the New York area, and our market share will grow. Upstate New York, probably into New Jersey, more into Connecticut. We're in Connecticut today. And probably at some time, over time, down towards Philadelphia. And it'll be done in this way. We are actually expanding organically that way. But some of the big systems in the region will actually start coming together in partnerships. So you have big systems in Boston. You have big systems in Philadelphia. You have some big systems in New Jersey. And just like years ago when hospitals came together and everybody said, this is a crazy idea, now it's taken for granted, it's happening every place. I do believe system-to-system relationships will be the next iteration of expansion. And we're currently talking to 7 large health systems in the Northeast. But it won't be ownership. It'll be like barbell approach, 2 big systems where we do joint things together. And if there's a system in Connecticut and a system here, us here and somebody else there, how we can actually build programs in between where we have joint ventures and we share information, and we do it that way. The world is getting very small. It's different than it was even 25 years ago. So, but on the global sense, I think it's more through influence. That's the way I would like to be able to do it. Yes.
is like wait on time, but is this correct? And I feel like I have a brother who has helicocephaly, and they didn't find a cure. But sometimes I felt that he was a checklist in their book, like a test. How do you make sure that your doctors that you're hiring are not the same?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it gets back to the whole issue of what you mean by quality, right? And there is massive variation in healthcare. Remember something, also you got to take the longer view on this. I'm a big believer that if you want to change practice in the future, you've got to start re-educating people today. It's very hard to educate people one way and expect people to practice a completely different way. Medical education was always taught one way up until very recently. Now it's beginning to change. And what we are doing in our health system is that we brought in all new physician leadership over the last 10 years. And so what's happening is you're getting younger leadership that understands the interdisciplinary nature of healthcare, that understand it's just not the doctor alone, it's the doctor with the nurse, and it's doctor to doctor. It's just not a cardiac problem is just not a cardiac problem. They got to work with the cancer docs, and they got to work with the pulmonary docs, and they got to work with all of the other disciplines. And getting leadership that understands the connectedness between all of the various components of health is the future. And that's what we're spending an awful lot of time and have done an awful lot of it to hire the right people that understand all of that interconnectedness. That will make the difference. 25 years ago when we started, most physician practices in Long Island, especially in Long Island, and most of it even today in New York City, are small business practices, doctor practices. 2 doctors in a practice, 3 doctors in a practice. They competed all the time. They didn't share as much. Today you got large groups. And the large groups are sharing more among each other. It's much more interdisciplinary. So I think over time you'll see much more coordination of care, much more standardization of care. And I definitely will improve. And as long as regulation that is promoted by government doesn't prevent you from doing that in kind of innovation over time. Sometimes government, with all good intentions, prevents you from doing some of the things that you really want to do because the reimbursement isn't there. And the reimbursement methodologies will eventually change. They're changing gradually, not as much as we'd like. The reason we started the insurance company was that I wanted to be able to get the premium dollar. So if I collect a premium dollar for you, I have all the incentive in the world to make sure you get healthy. Because if you're healthy, I do well financially. So you're not an episode of care. Every time you come in, the doc gets paid or the hospital gets paid. So you move to have an insurance company, which we try to have, and therefore you have the dollar up front and you try to deal with prevention, coordination of care, doing all of the things that prevent you going to the hospital unnecessarily, prevent treatments that are unnecessary or not proven to be, their efficacy is not proven. But it comes back to who you select as physicians, who you select as leaders, and the interdisciplinary nature of it. And that's all happening, but it will take a while. Go back there. Oh, this is a tough one.
Your presentation was very informative, very interesting. And I know you mentioned that technological advancement is really important for.
It's kind of like immediately going for it.
So, healthcare industry, it really advances technological development, but you also mentioned that the human capital is crucial for the industry. So I was wondering if you think that over time structural unemployment could happen in the industry due to huge technological development, and many jobs could be replaced, for example, surgeons, anesthesiologists. What's your opinion?
Well, this goes way beyond healthcare. And in fact, I had a discussion with somebody today, and I mean, this is a conundrum long term. When more and more, and it's a little bit separate from when I talked about the human aspect of healthcare, which I'll come back to, that more and more people's jobs are going to be done in the future by technology. So then the question arises, what happens to the people? And I was watching a program on television recently. It was a 60 Minutes program when there was one of the top technology leaders in China, runs one of the largest companies, who basically predicted on the television that in 20 years' time, almost 30% of all jobs will be replaced by technology. Now let's assume he's off by 50, 70%. What happens when a lot of the jobs that are currently being done are being replaced by technology? You have to find, I don't have a great answer, other than to say that no jobs will be created because of technology, but that requires that the educational system is to completely change. We have to completely redo, in my view, all education to prepare for the future and not continue to regurgitate all of the stuff that we've been doing in educational programs. And I'm not just talking universities, I'm going right down to high school, elementary, and be preparing people for the world of that world of the future. The only other alternative, which some people suggest, is that government will have to provide a guaranteed income for people that have no other ways to make money other than through employment if the employment disappears. The problem with that is who's going to pay? How much do you tax people to pay for that, especially if you do it in very, very large scale? It's very, very scary. So the new technology will create new jobs, but on the other hand, there's an awful lot of people that if they don't have the educational background, that in the short run, there'll be a lot of dislocation, a lot of unemployment. And if it happens as fast as some people suggest, it's a pretty dangerous scenario. On the human aspect, going back to my question, when a person is ill or a person needs help, then at the end of the day, despite all the technological advancements we have, you will need somebody to sit down and talk to that person, to touch that person. If you're sick in a hospital bed, you want the doctor to sit down next to you, or the nurse, put their hand on yours and tell you it's going to get better. That can never be replaced with technology. If that happens, we have lost something unbelievably important, and it will not be good. I mean, I've been in the hospital numerous times. I've had numerous surgeries because I played sports. I've had multiple surgeries. And when you're there yourself, you're on the other side, I mean, the view is very, very different. And you want that human touch. So we got to maximize the use of technology and maximize the human touch. One is not a complete substitute for the other. That's what's unbelievably important. And that's what we are constantly trying to instill in our organization, and then other organizations are doing the same thing.
So you've had a lot of success and helped grow Northwell a lot. What sort of mindset do you personally think someone has to be in order to make decisions and develop new things that drive innovation and advance the industry?
Get up every morning wanting to do something different than you did the day before, and allowing your staff the freedom to innovate. Like, you don't manage, you lead. There's a difference. I look for leaders, not just managers. Manager is somebody that says step 1, step 2, step 3, make sure everything budget is on time. You need people like that. But mainly you also want people that actually are looking at, leadership is about managing the present. Somebody once said this, I forget who it was. Leadership is managing the present, selectively forgetting the past, and creating the future. So you want people that are always asking the question, this can be better tomorrow, we can do this better tomorrow. We can do this better next year. And allow ideas to percolate up so you don't shut people off. Sometimes the biggest problem in organizations, in my view, is middle management. You can have great people at the top, but if you have middle management that curtail the people below them, it doesn't matter what the people in the top do. So you got to make sure the people in the middle management roles, the supervisory roles, are the most important, innovative people you have in your organization. So that as people will come up with ideas, And you got to be willing to allow that to occur. We in our organization, we run Shark Tanks, we run Innovation Awards. I don't have to, we run dozens of system programs every year to promote innovation. And you got to give a voice to the people down below. And as a leader, be willing to accept the fact that you're going to fail. And failure is a learning experience. When something fails, you have never failed. You've learned something for the next time. It's another way to look at it.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Suvir Simangal. I'm an undergrad finance major at Hofstra. You mentioned education and making improvements from high school upwards for real change in the healthcare industry. Building off of that framework, I know now in medical school, robotic surgery classes are becoming a larger and larger part of the curriculum, thus having implementation of robotic surgeries in hospitals. After doing some research in the market, especially with some of the leaders like ISRG and other robotic surgery providers, I was curious to see your thoughts on where you see that specific part of the industry going and what it means for the bottom line for a hospital like that.
Well, we are a system where we are one of the top robotic surgery places in the United States. We have been designated as such. So technology is, robotics is just another form of technology. It's just new ways of doing things, and that will continue to expand. On the bottom line, for the financial situation of a hospital, it depends on how you get paid. Some of it you do, let me give you another example on the other side. Digital health, telemedicine. We're doing a lot of telemedicine today we don't get paid for because the reimbursement system hasn't caught up with the new methods. So we're doing it, but we don't get fully reimbursed, or we get no reimbursement. We're doing it anyway. Why? Because that's the way the future is going to be. And you got to get out ahead, and you're going to take some losses along the way. Eventually, the payment will catch up to the delivery change. Whether the payment will be at a full amount that you should be getting, and that is a whole other story. I mean, you debate these things all the time. We have to negotiate for all the payments that we get, except for that which we get from Medicare and Medicaid, especially Medicaid. So if I don't look upon it, typically, I mean, I have people that will argue with me inside the organization, which is good, but if there is a new idea that made things better, that improves the outcome for people, my typical reaction all the time is says, go do it. Even if it does have a temporary downturn in terms of financial input, I'll say go ahead and do it anyway. We did that when we expanded ambulatory. We lost on one hospital one year, on ambulatory, we lost $30 million because we expanded the ambulatory. But we knew that's where the world was going. So you just take that risk and you go and do it, and you try to make it up someplace else. And a lot of the stuff you do in healthcare, you may never get paid for, and you may never get paid enough for doing it. And it's not in the technology area. It's what we do in behavioral health and mental health and substance abuse. Where we do an awful lot of services there, and we do an awful lot of innovative things, and we may never get paid. Healthcare organizations, putting it simply, you've got to do well. If you're running a large organization like ours, or even much smaller, you have to do well in cancer. You have to have good volume and do well in cancer, cardiac, musculoskeletal, and neuro. Those are the things that have the highest reimbursement, right, in general, that helps to fund that, all the rest of it, which you get paid sometimes nothing, very little, or you lose. So what do you lose on? Deliveries, emergency departments, behavioral health, psych hospitals. A lot of health systems don't run psych hospitals anymore. A lot of health systems don't have psych programs. So I can't run all my psych and continue commitment to psych if my cardiac isn't doing well. So I got to make sure my cardiac volume is good. I have good market share, good results, have the more efficient care I possibly can, because that pays well today. It may not be in the future, but it pays well today. Behavioral health is mostly Medicaid. You know you're losing money. So you're faced with the issue of, what, do I give up behavioral health and therefore I show a margin? I can make a very good margin in the health system. We make a margin. We make a 1% to 2% margin. I can make a 5% margin. There's no magic to it. There's a cost to it. I can make a 5% margin in 2 years if I stop doing a lot of things that the public needs, the public deserves, and it's the right thing to do. But if I stop doing them, I can make a high margin. Those are the choices you make all the time. So we've made the choice to provide services to everybody, irrespective of circumstance, to expand things like behavioral health, to expand programs for the veterans, et cetera, and make a relatively small margin, so enough that I can continue to grow and expand and have enough cash flow. If I'm all Medicaid, if single payer came into New York and the financial base of payment was Medicaid, forget about it. You are dead. You are dead because it doesn't pay enough. That's what some of the politicians and others don't fully understand at all. But those are the trade-offs you make all the time. Others?
All right, let me
go
say
up here.
last question, one last question for the evening.
Very much. This was one of the most compelling talks about management and motivation I've had the pleasure to hear.
Oh, thank you. From up here, I thought it was kind of boring, but... Yes.
So you talked about healthcare as a component of overall wellness.
Yes.
And Northwell has a phenomenal platform. What does Northwell do as a platform to promote other kinds of health and wellness outside of healthcare? How do you grow that as a business?
Well, now, yeah, you have a half an hour. No, let me, by the way. Okay, now, let me start it by this. When people ask me what I would like to be able to transform Northwell into, we're a pretty good organization today. We're not perfect. No organization is. But I want us to become a real health organization. What we are essentially, if we're honest about it, what we are is a pretty good, and in some place expert, illness treatment center that we call health. But illness treatment is only a component. So what I want to be able to do over the next number of years is to become a real health system which deals with wellness, prevention, education, etc. So we have a whole series of initiatives and programs on this. For example, the most recent one is food. We look at food as medicine. So we're doing an extensive amount of work all over the place on food, where we provide food to patients. We educate patients how to cook food, how to select food. For all of our own employees, 70,000, we have brought on 3 Michelin star chefs to lead our food business. The head guy was the chief chef at the Plaza Hotel for the past 14 years. He is now our head chef inside the organization. Because if I can't do it for our own employees, it's very, very hard to go outside and say I'm doing it for everybody. So we have a whole... Now, the problem with all of this is how to get paid for it. That's where the insurance company idea that we had to stop because of a part of Obamacare that was ridiculous and stupid. And we had to get out of the business because of it, totally ridiculous, made no sense. But we're looking at other ways to do this. There are other payment mechanisms that we're trying to figure out how to do it. We're also trying to go retail, to start lots of retail programs around exercise, education, dealing with the schools, dealing with school nurses, dealing with students in the schools, on and on and on. So we're trying to make that transition. If I were, let me give you the best organization that's in the best position to do this is Kaiser Permanente. And it does some of it. Because they have their own insurance company with 11 million subscribers. And their whole motivation with 11 million subscribers is to keep 11 million subscribers healthy. They don't want them coming to the hospital. My finances depend upon people coming to the hospital or coming to the ambulatory sites. So you have a new business model that's necessary that we're trying to evolve into, while the old business model is still the one that makes you money. So you have this inherent conflict inside the organization. So what you do is, so timing and pace make a difference. You can move, you can make the change, but if you make it too fast, you die. If you make it too slow, you're not relevant. So you have to have the right pace of change. You know, you've got to disrupt yourself cautiously and reasonably. You don't want to overdo it. So what the question you're asking is the movement that we're trying to make over the next number of years, and get the payers to pay us for this, get government to pay us for this, or start retail businesses where the public pays. And one last thing, and I know you want to get off here. One last thing. I would dream of a business where we provide a service, the consumer comes in, gives me his credit card, I swipe it, I get paid, and he leaves. And businesses, no, but guess what happens to us? And I don't think people understand this. You come in, you have insurance coverage. Let's assume you have very good insurance coverage. You come in, you're insured by X company. We provide the service. You leave, successful experience, let's hope. You assume we get paid. We don't necessarily get paid. I may have to fight to get paid from your insurance company for the services that you thought that you had. It may take me 2 years. We have 3,000 people working for us at Northwell who do nothing but try to get paid for services after we provide the service. You want to talk about that is an inefficiency component of healthcare, because you have the insurance companies, on the other hand, that deny an awful lot of it. Some of it they'll argue is because the care was unnecessary. Our argument is the doctor on the site who sees you is going to make the determination in our view whether the care is necessary or not somebody who's in Indianapolis who never met you that is going to determine that the care you just received was not necessary. These are the battles we have all the time. So we have a whole infrastructure about trying to get paid after we deliver the care. And 27% of the time, we don't get paid. Quickly, we may get some of it 2 years from now, but we have to build an infrastructure. So I dream of a business where you walk in, give a credit card, or cash is better, okay? And we walk away. You're happy, we're happy, everybody's happy. I don't have a back office army of people. This is a whole other part of the healthcare business that I don't think an awful lot of people fully understand. And I could go on about that, but I know.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
Very much. It was extraordinary.
Okay.
It was amazing. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening, and I hope you continue the conversation based on Michael's incredible insights into healthcare. Thank you for coming.